Hi, Arcfieldweather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday morning, December 14th. A lot to talk about this morning, both in the longer term and in the short term. We continue to have a major storm impacting much of the nation as we begin the day here on Wednesday, with some heavy snow continuing across the northern plains, shifting into the upper part of the Midwest. Tornadoes did break out yesterday in Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana. That threat has shifted to the east slightly. We'll talk about that over the next couple of minutes. A storm will reform along the eastern seaboard later tomorrow, ride up along the east coast, and spread some significant precipitation into the Mid-Atlantic region, the northeast U.S. Longer term, the ensemble runs still look quite amazing indeed in terms of an Arctic invasion into the U.S. later next week, into Christmas weekend, and we'll certainly talk about that. In fact, let's begin with the longer range look here. I'm talking about later next week into Christmas weekend. Some of the signals for the cold are pretty amazing indeed with these ensemble runs. And let's start off here with the 0Z ensemble run of the GFS. From last night, looking at 500 millibar height anomalies. Again, we have talked about this for many, many days now. A very strong high latitude blocking signal. This is all associated with that deeply negative NAO and negative AO, the Arctic Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation that we've talked about. Those teleconnection indices gave us a foreshadowing of what was coming. Indeed, very strong high latitude blocking. Now notice here, and we talked about this yesterday, about this omega pattern in the upper atmosphere. Basically the wind flow kind of represents the Greek letter omega in this fashion right here. And whenever you have a situation like that this time of the year, you have slow moving systems, and you generally have strong systems, whether it's a deep upper level low or a high pressure ridging, higher heights than normal. They both tend to be on the stronger side of normal in an omega block. This is a critical feature here in terms of the upcoming situation for the northeast mid-Atlantic region, as it locks in a surface high pressure system over southeastern Canada, and that in turn locks in a cold air mass, setting the stage for either a lot of icing, let's say across portions of the I-95 corridor, or significant snowfall interior sections of the mid-Atlantic and northeast U.S. Thursday into Friday. Well, let's move forward here. Again, we're looking at 500 millibar height anomalies, and this is upper level low over the middle of the nation is associated with that surface low pressure area that pretty much grinds to a halt as it pushes to the north and east. It runs into that brick wall in the upper part of the atmosphere. All this blocking here over the Hudson Bay region of Canada, extending up into Greenland. This low pressure area cannot penetrate that, and it pretty much grinds to a halt at the surface and the upper part of the atmosphere, right over the western Great Lakes, the upper Midwest, and surface low will reform tomorrow along the Carolina coastline and then move right up the eastern seaboard. Now let's move forward here. This spreads out, and quite an impressive cold shot follows this storm for the upcoming weekend into much of the eastern and central part of the nation. Then we go into the middle part of the weekend, into the latter part of the weekend. And again, keep in mind, we've been talking about cross-polar flow, where get some air dropping into North America from the other side of the pole, and certainly that can lead to some much colder than normal air masses into Canada, into the U.S. Indeed, that is what is on the table for later next week. This is Sunday. Now let's keep moving forward here, and we have basically a tremendous cold shot that will move into the western part of Canada during the early and middle part of next week, and an upper level low will certainly show some intensification later next week as this Arctic air mass starts to flood the country from northwest to southeast. Could this result in a snowstorm in the eastern U.S. late next week going into Christmas weekend? Absolutely. That is on the table. This is quite an impressive signal. We've talked about ensemble runs tend to smooth things out with time. They tend to feed in a little bit more climatology as you go farther and farther out. This is more than a week away, and it has a pretty deep low pressure system over the Great Lakes region into the eastern U.S. That is quite an impressive signal this far out. Now let's move forward here into the end of next week. We're now looking at Friday, December 23rd, and finally into Christmas weekend. This is what the ensemble run of the GFS looks like in terms of lower heights than normal over the eastern part of the U.S. Still some signs of that blocking over Hudson Bay region of Canada into Greenland. And again, this looks a little smoother, maybe a little less extreme than what we're starting off the time period with, but that's because it's an ensemble run. Also a key player here, you have high pressure ridging setting up along the western U.S. coast, Canada. That allows for the transportation of very cold air masses from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Indeed, this is the path that cold air invasion will take later next week going into Christmas weekend. Well, now let's take a look at the 850 millibar temperature anomalies, again using the 0Z run of the GFS from last night. Colder than normal conditions right now across much of the western U.S. They had blizzard with heavy snowfall across much of the northern Rockies into the Dakotas, Nebraska, now shifting into Minnesota and Wisconsin. Now, let's move forward here and watch the evolution of this. First of all, by later tonight and tomorrow, more severe weather is possible down in the deep south. The clash area between the colder air to the west, warmer than normal, more humid than normal air to the east. Again, you had some tornadoes yesterday in Oklahoma and Texas, Louisiana, shifting a little bit to the east today and tonight as this clash develops here in that part of the nation with the colder air moving in from the west. Now let's continue to move forward here, and behind this system that impacts the northeast U.S. and mid-Atlantic region Thursday into Friday, quite a cold shot comes into the nation here, and it's pretty cold from coast to coast here as we begin Saturday morning. Again, colder than normal across much of the U.S. This warmer than normal blob is associated with those higher heights, higher pressures than normal over Hudson Bay, over Greenland. And look at this. Just keep an eye on this particular Arctic invasion. Again, some of this air has come from across the pole, on the other side of the pole, into the western part of Canada. And when you're talking about the latter part of December, you're seeing normals, departure from normals some 20-25 degrees below normal. That is awfully cold air. Still have some cold air remaining in the eastern U.S. before the real Arctic invasion makes its way into the central and eastern states. Here we are now in the early part of next week with this cold air, a widespread Arctic invasion moving from western Canada into the northwestern part of the U.S., the north central part of the U.S., and it just gradually spills over to the south and east, making its way all the way into the eastern U.S. by the middle and latter part of the week. And the real core of that cold air mass, relative to normal, the part of the air mass that will be most below normal, reaches the northern plains by, let's say, Thursday of next week. Perhaps some record low temperatures here, maybe a few days in a row with temperatures holding at or below zero in parts of North Dakota, for example, later next week. And you see the core of that cold air mass, again, the real core slides slowly to the south and east late next week. We're now looking ahead to the end of next week. This is Friday, December 23rd, leading into Christmas weekend. And that real brutal cold air works its way right into the central and eastern states by Christmas weekend. We're looking here at Saturday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. And again, keep in mind, this is an ensemble run. It tends to smooth things out. We're more than 10 days away, and yet a very, very strong signal for far below normal temperatures Christmas weekend in the central and eastern U.S. And again, keep in mind, there could be a storm that accompanies the arrival of this Arctic blast late next week into the weekend in the eastern part of the nation, but we have a lot to get through before we get to that point. Now let's focus in on the shorter term. I'm apologize for these videos of the last few days being so long, but we have a lot to talk about here, a lot going on both in the longer term and in the short term. Here we have the 24-hour total snow forecast from last night's 0Z run of the GFS. That's, in other words, the snowfall from this morning, Wednesday morning, to tomorrow morning, Thursday morning. By the way, many of you may have noticed I tend to focus in on the 0Z run of the GFS versus the 6Z. Similarly, I focus in on the 12Z run. Those two runs are the most important runs, the 0Z and the 12Z runs, because radius on data, which is critical to the overall forecast, supplies the upper air data for these computer forecast models. And radius on balloons are generally launched twice a day only. And that feeds into the 12Z and the 0Z model runs. So I focus in on those. Those are probably more accurate and more important in my opinion. If you see a snowstorm all of a sudden develop on an 18Z run or a 06Z run, don't have complete confidence in it unless it is verified by the next run, the 12Z run or the 0Z run. Oftentimes, there's quite a difference between a 6Z run and a 0Z run, or an 18Z run and the one preceding or the one after it, and that's because the freshest upper air data is fed into the 0Z run and the 12Z run. So again, the 6Z run is available, but I'm focusing here on the 0Z run. And the heaviest snow over the next 24 hours shifts from the Dakotas and Nebraska to the northern part, especially the northern half of Wisconsin, really all the way into southern Wisconsin, as well as some significant snow in Minnesota. This is showing up on the maps here. Some of this includes sleet into the I-95 corridor region early tomorrow. We'll talk about that in a moment here. But again, in terms of the snow, the heavy snow now shifts from the Dakotas, Nebraska, into the upper part of the Midwest over the next 24 hours or so. Now, in terms of severe weather today and tonight, going into the day tomorrow, there were tornadoes in this part of the nation yesterday. I know Shreveport had a deadly tornado, and there were tornadoes in Oklahoma and Texas. That whole area shifts a little bit to the east with an enhanced risk of severe weather today across Louisiana, Mississippi, and the southern part of Alabama, even southwestern Georgia. Right here, watch out for the severe weather. We have warm and humid air out ahead of that cold front, pumping in the humidity that gets the atmosphere more unstable. So a severe weather threat as that clash moves a little bit farther to the east with colder air to the west, warm humid air out ahead of the front. So watch out in this part of the nation for possible severe weather, not only today but into tonight as well. Well, let's now take a look at the high-resolution version of the NAM model. This is a higher resolution. We have a 12-kilometer resolution version. We have a 3-kilometer NAM. I'm using the high-resolution model because as we get into the late night, early morning hours in the Mid-Atlantic region, I think a higher resolution model has a little better handle on freezing rain, sleet, snow, a wintry mix setting up for the I-95 corridor region, certainly from D.C. to Philadelphia late tonight, early tomorrow. Let's start off here Wednesday morning. We have the primary low that caused the heavy snowfall, first of all, over the Sierra Nevada, the southern Cascades during the past weekend, up to 6 feet of snow in the Sierra Mountains of eastern California, then into the northern Rocky Mountain states, yesterday into the northern plains, Nebraska, even the Dakotas. Still snowing this morning, and the heaviest of the snow over the next 24 hours will be Minnesota, shifting into Wisconsin. This surface low rides up a little bit more to the north and east and runs into that brick wall in the atmosphere with that tremendous blocking over central and northern Canada. It can't go any farther to the north and east. It kind of grinds to a halt, and that leads to the formation of surface low first over the Carolinas tomorrow, and then near the Delmarva Peninsula by tomorrow night, off of Long Island by early to midday on Friday. Let's walk through on an hourly basis here. Again, one other point, strong high pressure over southeastern Canada. That's as a result of that omega blocking pattern, those very high heights over Hudson Bay. This is Hudson Bay right in this region right here. Key player, strong surface high over the southeastern Canada, keeps that cold air in place in the northeastern part of the nation. Let's move forward here. And again, keep in mind we have the severe weather threat. You can see, even see the squall line forming by midday today over Louisiana. That severe weather threat extends into Mississippi, Alabama, ultimately into Georgia, maybe even to the parts of the Tennessee Valley. Snow develops in earnest across the northern part of Wisconsin by midday. And here we go, the high holding in place over southeastern Canada. And we go, a very impressive squall line here by early tonight. And snow again into the upper part of the Midwest, still falling over the Dakotas. The low pressure area kind of grinds to a halt, starts to weaken a little bit later on tonight. And then we get into the, let's say, the midnight hour, late tonight, the wee hours of the morning. This is when the trouble begins in D.C. Now we have all this cold air still locked in place, but there will be a shallow layer just above the ground level that will become above freezing. That will cause some sleet and some rain in the lower part of the atmosphere. That rain will fall, reach the ground level, let's say in D.C., especially the northern western suburbs, later tonight, and can freeze on untreated surfaces because temperatures will be at or below freezing. Again, the timing is not good for D.C., and nor is it good for Philadelphia. The timing is late tonight, early tomorrow morning in D.C., maybe early to mid-morning in Philly. Coldest time of the day, and that allows for the possibility of slick roads in the D.C. metro region later on tonight into early tomorrow morning and early to mid-morning in Philadelphia. The timing of the precipitation is actually pretty favorable in New York City in that it holds off until midday when temperatures may largely be above freezing in the New York City metro region. Let's move forward here. All this color, the red, the purple, that represents ice, freezing rain or sleet, maybe some snow mixed in as well. Significant snow, by the way, in Wisconsin early tomorrow morning. Let's move forward here. This precipitation band moves from southwest to northeast. It'll reach the southwestern suburbs of D.C. and Philadelphia before it reaches the northern and eastern suburbs in those two metro areas. Again, anywhere from, let's say, 11 p.m. tonight to maybe 3 a.m. for the arrival time in D.C., let's say 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. in Philadelphia. Watch out, roads can become slick. Moves into New York City area by, let's say, late morning, midday hours, and by that time temperatures largely may be above freezing, so less of a threat of icing in the New York City metro region as compared with D.C. Or Philadelphia, all a result of the timing here. Now, keep in mind we have this cold air locked in place, so interior sections of the Mid-Atlantic and the northeastern part of the nation will get significant snow. However, I do expect a mixing with the precipitation all the way up to places like central Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania. That'll kind of hold the snow accumulations down somewhat, maybe 3 to 6 inch range, let's say from State College to Scranton. Ice will mix in, I think, even way up there in central Pennsylvania, even in those higher elevations, northeastern Pennsylvania. The surface low that first forms later tomorrow over the Carolinas, then moves up along the Delmarva Peninsula. Not the perfect position by any means for a snowstorm in the I-95 corridor region. You'd rather see that surface low 50 miles off the eastern seaboard. It's so difficult to get accumulating snow in the I-95 corridor region this time of the year because the ocean temperatures are still relatively warm compared to what they will be like in February or March. That's when they bottom out. So any kind of a trajectory of the winds off the ocean will pump in maritime air, slightly milder air into D.C. and especially into Philadelphia and New York City, which are closer to the western Atlantic Ocean than is D.C. So that is indeed what will happen tomorrow. D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, you'll have increasingly strong winds out of the east. That will assure a changeover to plain rain by late morning in D.C., by afternoon in Philly, in afternoon and evening in New York City. Plain rain with a strong easterly winds pumping in milder maritime air. Tomorrow night looks downright stormy in Philadelphia and New York City with heavy rain Strong winds, snow way upstate Pennsylvania into New York, but again, they can mix in at times with some ice, maybe 3 to 6 inches from central PA to northeastern PA. That is accumulating snow extends into interior northeastern U.S. by late Thursday night into Friday morning, and here's that low off the Mid-Atlantic coastline finally by Friday morning. Again, keep in mind, pretty darn cold air covers much of the nation by Friday night and Saturday. Throughout much of the eastern two-thirds of the nation, it'll be a colder than normal air mass flooding the U.S., but the real Arctic invasion comes later next week into Christmas week. And sorry again, I'm so long here, but a lot going on over the next week to 10 days or so. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, I'm meteorologist